Hello, friends. Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast here on YouTube. My name is Andy Herman. I am a writer and editor for Packer Report. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Today, I'm going to be going over one topic, and that topic is going to be some interesting decisions that are kind of under the radar that Brian Gutekunst and the front office staff for Green Bay are going to have to make this upcoming offseason. And I'm not talking the obvious ones here, right? I'm not talking Aaron Jones or Kevin King. I'm not talking about Corey Linsley, Jamal Williams. Those are all going to be really interesting, unrestricted free agents that Green Bay is going to have to make decisions on. I'm also not talking about four players, in my opinion, that are 99% likely to get cut based on the current roster situation. Never wishing anyone to lose their job or get cut, but based on the current situation with the salary cap, Preston Smith, Dean Lowry, Christian Kirksey, Rick Wagner, unless there's some major restructuring, just how things are set up, I would expect Green Bay to move on from those four players. So not talking about any of those, some obvious cuts or some unrestricted free agents. Those are all decisions that we're all going to be keeping an eye on this upcoming offseason. Instead, there are five different players that I want to go over in a bit more detail because I do think there's some really interesting decisions that Brian Gutekunst is going to have to make. These are in no particular order, so I will start number one with Mason Crosby. And I know already what you're thinking. Why is Mason Crosby on this list? He didn't miss a field goal a season ago. He is a consummate professional, a future Packers Hall of Famer. He literally was the only thing that went well for the Packers special teams last season. Why would, you potentially even think about moving on or making a decision on Mason Crosby? And I think ultimately he's going to be back with Green Bay. I think Green Bay is going to want him back. He knows the stadium. He knows how to kick in the conditions at Lambeau Field. He made every kick a season ago. Even the extra point misses, some of those seem like it was more the snap or the hold than it was to do with Mason Crosby. He still has enough leg to get the ball down the field on kickoff. So there's nothing to me that would lend me to believe, even though he's going to be 37 in September, that Green Bay's looking to necessarily move on from him. And I definitely think Mason Crosby's going to want to finish his career in Green Bay if at all possible. However, he is set to make $4.5 million in salary this season, and Green Bay can get off of $3.5 million of that salary with a June 1st designation or cutting him after June 1st. And this is going to be one of those off seasons where every single dollar matters. And $3.5 million in savings when you have one of the better kickers in football may not seem like that much. You want that type of kicker in the game. End of the game, you need a field goal to win or tie the game. Clutch situations, you want Mason Crosby. You don't want a rookie or a younger guy. But $3.5 million could go a lot of different ways this offseason. It could help you build your secondary, maybe help you bring back a Corey Linsley or Aaron Jones. That's a lot of money that Green Bay doesn't have right now in this upcoming offseason. And everything is just like a decision tree that like one decision leads to another set of questions, which leads to another set of questions. You make one, or a Jenga tower, if you will, you make one decision, it's going to affect everything else. And, potentially releasing Mason Crosby could free up money for other free agents that you either want to keep or bring in. And it's definitely a risky proposition. And I don't think anyone, myself included, is wanting Mason Crosby not on this team in 2021. I think that might be the one thing that every fan agrees on, that Mason Crosby should be a Packer in 2021, right? I think that might be the one unanimous thing that like literally everyone believes. But you do have to make those very difficult decisions if you're Brian Gutekunst. And here's kind of how I would handle this if I were Green Bay. They do have J.J. Molson on the roster. He's a futures free agent that Green Bay signed. I'm not sure that you are putting too much stock in J.J. Molson at this point. Maybe they found something right, and maybe he could challenge Mason Crosby in camp. But they are set to have a 6th round compensatory selection as well as a 7th round pick. If I'm Green Bay, I'm taking a flyer on a kicker in the late 6th or late 6th, late 7th round, somewhere in there. And if I hit on him and all of a sudden this new kicker just crushes everything in camp and they look fantastic, then maybe I just make the decision. All right, sorry, Mason, we're going to go in a different direction. We feel like we got our kicker for the next 10 years. Maybe you didn't hit it out of the park, but you like the kicker. Then what it does is it potentially gives you some leverage. And I don't think Green Bay has that right now. And I want to preface this by saying I want the Packers to do well, but I also want these players to get as much money as they can. I would love Mason Crosby to go out and earn as much money, that $4.5 million, have an awesome season for Green Bay. Again, I'm not cheering for Mason Crosby to be cut. I'm more trying to bring you examples of why these decisions could be difficult this upcoming offseason. But let's say they get a kicker that they like and they think could maybe be the future of the position for the next decade or so. What you can do then is you can go to Mason Crosby and you can say, or in his agent, and say, hey, you know what? if my decision comes down to this rookie kicker who's making, 600,000 or Mason Crosby at 4.5 million, I have to go with the rookie kicker. We like the kid. We think he's got a bright future. However, if we can get that number down and it's, say, Mason Crosby at 2 to 2.25 million or a rookie kicker at 600,000, now I'm more likely to lean towards Mason Crosby and make that decision. Can we get that number down? And then if he says yeah, and you get that number down and you save $2 million plus in salary cap and you get to keep Mason Crosby, it's a win certainly for the Packers, certainly a loss for Mason Crosby, which again, I'm not wishing upon him or his family, but these are the cold-hearted negotiations that you unfortunately have to have as a general manager. So, and then if he says no, I don't think so, then maybe you make that decision and you go with the rookie kicker if you think he looked good enough at camp. But I think you delay that decision until the end of camp and at least bring in competition first before just releasing them outright before the season, before you have somebody in place and then scrambling to try to find your next Packers kicker. I think that's absolutely the wrong way to go about it. And if you draft a kicker or, JJ Molson doesn't end up being the guy, whatever, and you get to the, roster cuts and Mason Crosby is by far and away the best kicker, then you bite the bullet and you keep him for 4.5 million. But I think you at least try to give yourself outs to see if you can get that number down or release him if you somehow find a gem at kicker somewhere in the draft or an undrafted free agency. What would this list be at number 2 without Tim Boyle? And I am not saying this in jest in any way, shape, or form. This is a legitimately interesting decision for Green Bay. Brian Gutekunst was quoted just last year as saying that they feel like if Tim Boyle had to get in the game, that they could win games with Tim Boyle. Now, what else are you supposed to say? No, we're screwed. I get that. But, I do believe that they put a lot of time, effort, and energy into Tim Boyle, making him the backup quarterback this past season, even when they drafted Jordan Love. I think they do have a lot of confidence in him. Guys, he legitimately looked really good in training camp last season. He had full control of the offense. And it was really fun to watch. And the battle between him and Jordan Love was never remotely close. I mean, Tim Boyle never even let Jordan Love get in that discussion. And that's not me as a Tim Boyle stan saying that. That's me legitimately saying that. And Nagler just recently posted on Twitter too, saying something similar of how, well Tim Boyle looked in this last training camp. It was legitimate. So you've spent this time, effort, and energy. I certainly don't think you can just say he's a restricted free agent. I don't think you can say we're not going to tender him at all and just let him hit the market and go in a different direction. But then that, you become a really interesting decision as well, because if you just invested all that time, effort, and energy, use your backup quarterback, you felt really strongly about him, and you think he could potentially start games. Remember also Bob McGinn last year during the draft when the Packers selected Jordan Love, when he talked to some of the anonymous scouts and things like that, they had high praise for for Tim Boyle, saying that they thought he might, eventually be able to develop into something. So they've got this really interesting prospect that nobody really knows what his ceiling or what his floor is at this point. And to just let him walk in unrestricted free agency really doesn't seem like the right move to make. On the flip side, you're paying Aaron Rodgers at this point $37.6 million. Jordan Love was your first round pick last year at $2.8 million. And if you tender Tim Boyle, the minimum tender that you can give him is going to be around $2.1 million. You're starting to add up a lot of money in your quarterbacks. And especially when you probably need Jordan Love to get those snaps if you wanted to start developing him as a quarterback, long-term quarterback. If he's not the backup, if he's the third stringer, he's probably not even getting a ton of, backup snaps, scout team reps. Those are all going to go to Tim Boyle as the backup. So you do have a really interesting dynamic there. But again, it seems really weird that you would just let him walk for nothing. And, they could put that, right of first refusal on him. But if because he was an unrestricted or an undrafted free agent, you wouldn't get anything in return if some other team signed him. And it's not unthinkable. Some really good backups go for, 5 to 10 million. And I'm not saying he's that, but, it's easy to say that some team could easily offer him a 1-year, $4 million deal, if not well more than that. And, if he gets that, Green Bay again loses him for absolutely nothing. But are you going to put a second round tender on him, which is $3.4 million? Now you're bumping that up even more. And we just talked about how 3.4 to 3.5 million is so incredibly important. So that's a really interesting decision. It's a really poor, decision if you lose him for absolutely nothing. It might be a poor decision if you keep him on the roster for, $2 to $3 million, and it, in turn maybe makes Jordan Love's play go down a little bit. You could look at, putting a second round tender on him and then trying to, trade him around the league so he comes back at $3.3 million with no bonus. And then you try to trade him around the league, at least get maybe a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick, maybe more if you're lucky, but some sort of compensation for him. Tim Boyle on a 1-year, $3.3 million deal for a team that wants to take a flyer on a backup quarterback. I think that's ultimately good value if you're going to trade a late round pick for that. So I think that's the direction that maybe Green Bay goes, but that's another really interesting decision that Green Bay is going to have to make that, again, is sort of complicated in a way by Jordan Love and the selection of him. All right, number 3 on my list is Bobby Tonyan. Now, like Tim Boyle, Tonyan is a restricted free agent. Unlike Tim Boyle, there's not too much of a decision here. They're, of course, going to tender him, but they cannot tender him a right of first refusal, you would think, because he is also an undrafted free agent. So some team signs him to a big deal, you get nothing in return, and you lose your tight end. So you can't go that direction. So now the interesting decision and discussion becomes, do you want to put a first round tender on him for about $4.8 million, or do you want to put a second round tender on him for about $3.4 million? There's about a $1.4 million difference between the first and second round tender. So if I'm a gambling man, if I'm Brian Gutekunst, I keep wanting to say Ted Thompson lately. If I'm Brian Gutekunst, I think I can get away with the second round tender and feel confident that some team is not in this market is going to sign him to a huge deal that I can't match. And ultimately, if they would, you get a second round pick in return. Like, that's a steep price. I know Bobby Tonyan just had an amazing season, but for some team to give him a massive contract that Green Bay wouldn't match and give up a second round pick, that's probably a little bit steep for Robert Tonyan. So I think if you're Green Bay, you can get away with that second round tender, but you are playing with fire a little bit where, you finally developed a tight end and you could lose him. I think if you're Brian Gutekunst, you feel comfortable with that second round tender and say, you know what, worst case scenario, if some team signs him to a huge contract, we'll take the second round pick and we'll find another tight end some way, shape, or form, or give Josiah DeGuara and Jay Sternberger an opportunity. But that's another interesting decision of whether or not he gets the first round tender or the second round tender. If I'm Brian Gutekunst, I lean second round, but a first round tender certainly would not shock me based on this past season. Number 4 on my list is Devin Funchess. This is an interesting one. You can release him and get about a $1.265 million savings. Remember, like, a minimum player that would replace him is going to make $600,000. So you only save about, $600,000 ish in savings by releasing him, by going from Funchess to a minimum wide receiver. So I think what you probably do with Funchess is you bring him to training camp and you see how he plays and you see if he fits within your offense. And if he makes the team, he makes the team. And again, it's only about $600,000 more than what you'd pay a minimum player at that point. So, awesome. If he makes it, perfect. And if not, if he just doesn't look good, you release him and you take that minimum free agent or whomever instead, and you save yourself $500,000 that you can use later. So that's probably what I would do with Funchess. But with him being out really the past 2 years, right? He played the one game for the Colts and got hurt in that game, sat out all season, opted out all of last season, and now would be, basically 2 years removed from playing. You'd think it's going to be tough for him to come back and be super effective, but maybe he's got fresh legs and he looks really great in camp and you give him an opportunity. So that's probably the easy decision there. And then last but not least, what you do with Josh Jackson and Chandon Sullivan. That's number 5. Chandon Sullivan's a restricted free agent, so you end up in basically the same situation as Tim Boyle. Do you want to give him $2 million as your slot corner? Is he worth that as your third or fourth corner on the roster? You just got picked on in the playoff game. I think the answer is probably yes, because you signed him to that right of first refusal. I don't think anyone else makes a big offer for Chandon Sullivan. If they do, tip your cap and probably let him walk. But I think you probably give him that $2.1 million contract. You bring him in. There's no guarantees with it. So you let him play through the remainder of training camp and preseason, if there is one. And then you get to the end of training camp and make that decision then. Do I want to go, Chandon Sullivan for $2.1 million, or do I go with a cheaper guy and save $1.5 million, basically, when you factor in the minimum contract for another player? All right. And then Josh Jackson, as I mentioned, He's set to make $2 million. You can save about $1.3 million of that. Again, basically 600 to 650,000. The question here is just how much do they still value Josh Jackson? He was inactive for like the last, I don't know, like 7-8 games it seemed like. And it just doesn't seem like they have a lot of faith yet. This just screams one of those trades where you like take 2 former first or second round picks and just get a change of scenery and see if something can click. And I think that would make a ton of sense for Josh Jackson. He has talent, just hasn't fit in with Green Bay. Maybe you see what defense you're running first with what defensive coordinator and stuff like that, and maybe Josh Jackson would fit better. And again, maybe he's somebody that you bring in, let him compete in this new defense, and then make that decision at the end of camp. But I think that's another really interesting one. So Mason Crosby, Tim Boyle, Tonyan, Funchess, and then Josh Jackson, Chandon Sullivan at corner. I think those are all going to be really interesting conversations to kind of keep an eye on as we go through this offseason. That's going to do it for me. Thank you so incredibly much, as always, for listening. I appreciate you all greatly. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.